Have you ever promised yourself that you would stop? Not forever, just this one time, just tonight, just one more scroll before bed, just one more episode, just one more hour of procrastination, just one more excuse. And yet, somehow, that one time turned into another day, another week, another month. Maybe you've experienced that strange feeling of frustration that comes when you realize you're fighting against yourself, not against another person, not against bad luck, not against your circumstances, against yourself. Because deep down, you already know what you should be doing. You know you should start. You know you should continue. You know you should stop certain habits. You know you should make better choices. And yet, knowing has never been the problem, has it? Think about that for a moment. Most people don't suffer because they don't know enough. Most people suffer because there is a gap between what they know and what they do. A gap between intention and action. A gap between desire and discipline. A gap between who they are and who they could become. And that gap is where countless dreams go to die. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe you're tired of watching your own potential sit on the sidelines. Maybe you're tired of making promises to yourself that never seem to last. Maybe you're tired of feeling like there are invisible forces pulling you away from the life you truly want. If that's you, then I want you to know something. You are not alone, not even close. In fact, one of the greatest battles in human history is being fought right now. Not on a battlefield, not in a government building, not in a courtroom, not even in the streets. It's being fought inside millions of minds every single day, including yours. A battle between what feels good now and what will be good later. A battle between comfort and growth. A battle between pleasure and purpose. A battle between the person you are today and the person you could become tomorrow. And here's what makes this battle so difficult. The enemy rarely looks like an enemy. Temptation doesn't arrive wearing a warning sign. It doesn't knock on your door and announce itself. It doesn't say, "Hello, I've come to steal your future." No, it arrives wearing the disguise of comfort. It arrives looking harmless. It arrives sounding reasonable. It whispers things like, "You deserve a break. You can start tomorrow. One more time won't hurt. Everyone else is doing it. Life is short. Enjoy yourself." And sometimes those whispers sound so convincing that we don't even realize we've surrendered until much later, until the opportunity is gone, until the goal is abandoned, until another year has disappeared. Have you ever looked back on a season of your life and wondered where the time went? Not because you were busy building something meaningful, but because you were distracted, because you drifted. A few minutes here, an hour there. A small decision repeated often enough to become a habit. And before you knew it, years had passed. This is one of the most dangerous truths about temptation. Its damage is usually invisible at first. The consequences don't always show up immediately. When you procrastinate today, tomorrow still arrives. When you waste one evening, the world keeps turning. When you ignore your goals for a week, nothing dramatic happens, which is exactly why it becomes so easy. The price is delayed, and because the price is delayed, the danger feels small. But life has a way of collecting unpaid bills. The choices we make repeatedly eventually reveal their cost. A neglected dream becomes regret. A neglected skill becomes missed opportunity. A neglected relationship becomes distance. A neglected purpose becomes a life that feels empty. And one day, many people wake up asking a question they never expected to ask. What happened to me? Not because they lacked talent, not because they lacked intelligence, not because they lacked potential, but because they spent years surrendering to things that felt irresistible. Now, before we continue, I want to ask you something. What is the irresistible thing in your life? Don't rush past that question. Really think about it. Maybe it's procrastination. Maybe it's comfort. Maybe it's distraction. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's social media. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's the habit of quitting whenever things become difficult. Maybe it's something you've never spoken about out loud. Whatever it is, you probably know exactly what came to mind when I asked that question. Because deep down, most of us already know where our struggle lives. The challenge isn't identifying it. The challenge is overcoming it. And that's what this journey is about. Not perfection, not becoming some flawless human being who never struggles. That's not reality. The goal isn't to eliminate temptation. The goal is to stop being controlled by it. Because there is a powerful difference between feeling temptation and obeying temptation. One is human, the other is a choice. And while that choice may not always feel easy, it is far more powerful than most people realize. You see, history is filled with people who achieved extraordinary things. Inventors, leaders, athletes, artists, entrepreneurs, thinkers, builders. And if you look closely at their lives, you'll notice something interesting. They weren't people who never felt temptation, because somehow your attention got stolen one day at a time. Starting exactly where you are today, no matter what your past looks like, no matter how many times you've failed, no matter how many unfinished goals sit behind you, no matter how many promises you've broken to yourself, today is still a decision point, a crossroads. And perhaps that's why you're listening right now. Perhaps some part of you is tired of being pulled in directions you never intended to go. Perhaps some part of you is ready for something different, ready to stop drifting, ready to stop surrendering, ready to discover what becomes possible when you finally begin taking control of your attention, your choices, your habits, and ultimately your future. Because the truth is this: your future is being built right now, not someday, not next year, not when circumstances improve. Right now, through the choices you repeat, through the habits you strengthen, through the temptations you feed, and through the temptations you resist. The road ahead will not always be easy. There will be uncomfortable truths. There will be moments of reflection. There will be moments when you recognize yourself in ways you didn't expect. But there will also be hope. Because no matter how strong temptation appears, no matter how long you've struggled, no matter how many times you've fallen into the same patterns, one truth remains. What feels irresistible is often far less powerful than the person who learns how to face it. And that journey begins now. Chapter 1: The Age of Endless Temptation. Have you ever noticed how difficult it has become to simply sit alone with your thoughts? Not forever, just for 10 minutes. No phone, no music, no notifications, no videos, no scrolling. Just you and your own mind. For many people, that sounds almost uncomfortable. And if we're being honest, that should concern us. Because there was a time when silence was normal. There was a time when waiting in line meant simply waiting. There was a time when sitting in a room alone didn't immediately trigger the urge to reach for a screen. There was a time when boredom wasn't treated like an emergency. But something has changed. And whether you've realized it or not, you're living in one of the most distracting periods in human history. Think about your average day. Before your feet even touch the floor in the morning, something is already competing for your attention. A notification, a message, an email, a headline, a recommendation, a trend, a video, a post. Something is always calling your name. Something is always asking for just a little bit of your attention. And that's the interesting part. Nothing asks for all of it. Just a little. Just a few seconds. Just one click. Just one glance. Just one scroll. But life is rarely changed by one scroll. Life is changed by thousands of them. One distraction seems harmless. One delay seems harmless. One wasted evening seems harmless. And most of the time, they are harmless by themselves. The problem begins when they become a lifestyle. The problem begins when distraction becomes the default setting of your life. Let me ask you something. Have you ever picked up your phone to do one thing and somehow ended up doing 10 completely different things? You unlock the screen. You check one message, then another. Then a notification appears. Then a video catches your attention. Then another video. Then another. Then suddenly you look at the clock. 30 minutes have disappeared. Maybe even an hour. Where did it go? You don't even know. And that's exactly what makes modern temptation so dangerous. It doesn't feel dangerous. The things that destroy our focus today rarely arrive looking like threats. They arrive looking entertaining, convenient, comfortable, interesting, enjoyable. Temptation has evolved. Years ago, people imagined temptation as something obvious, something dramatic, something easy to identify. But modern temptation is subtle. It smiles. It entertains. It comforts. It relaxes. And while you're enjoying it, it quietly asks for something in return. Your attention, your focus, your time, your future. The truth is that we are surrounded by systems designed to keep us engaged. Think about that carefully. Entire teams of intelligent people spend their days trying to answer one question. How can we keep people looking a little longer? Not because they're evil, not because they're trying to ruin lives, because attention has become valuable, very valuable. The longer someone keeps your attention, the more money can be made, the more products can be sold, the more advertisements can be shown, the more influence can be gained, which means every day you are walking through a world that is constantly competing for one of your most precious resources. And what is that resource? Not your money, not your possessions, not even your energy, your attention. Because where attention goes, life follows. Think about that. Where attention goes, life follows. If your attention consistently goes toward growth, growth follows. If your attention consistently goes toward learning, learning follows. If your attention consistently goes toward meaningful work, progress follows. But if your attention constantly goes toward distraction, then distraction becomes your life. That's why attention is so important. It determines direction, and direction determines destiny. Now here's something worth thinking about. Most people are not losing their lives all at once. They're losing them a few minutes at a time. A few minutes here, a few minutes there, a few distractions today, a few distractions tomorrow. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, nothing that immediately feels dangerous. But years later, the results become visible. The dream remains unfinished. The goal remains untouched. The business never starts. The book never gets written. The skill never gets developed. The life they imagined remains trapped inside their imagination. Not because they lacked talent, not because they lacked intelligence, not because they lacked potential, because their attention was scattered. And scattered attention creates scattered results. Maybe you felt that before. Maybe you've ended a day feeling busy but accomplished very little. You were active. You were occupied. You were moving. But somehow you weren't progressing. There's a difference. Movement is not always progress. Activity is not always achievement. Being busy is not the same as being productive. And one of the greatest tricks temptation plays on us is convincing us that constant stimulation is the same thing as meaningful living. It isn't. A person can spend an entire day stimulated and still feel empty at the end of it, because stimulation and fulfillment are not the same thing. One excites you, the other satisfies you. One feels good in the moment, the other feels meaningful in the long run. And many people spend years chasing one while secretly longing for the other. Maybe you've experienced that feeling. You spend hours consuming content, watching, scrolling, clicking, jumping from one thing to another. Yet somehow, when the day ends, there's a strange sense of dissatisfaction, a feeling that something important is missing. Do you know why? Because human beings were not created merely to consume. We were created to create, to build, to grow, to contribute, to become. And when all our energy goes into consuming, something inside us begins to feel restless. Because deep down, we know we're capable of more. We know there is a larger version of ourselves waiting to emerge. A version that finishes what it starts. A version that keeps promises. A version that chooses purpose over impulse. A version that doesn't surrender every time temptation knocks on the door. And perhaps that's why you're here. Not because you're looking for perfection. Not because you're looking for some magical solution. But because part of you is tired. Tired of being pulled in 100 different directions. Tired of feeling distracted. Tired of watching your attention drift away from the things that matter most. If that's true, then there is something important you need to understand. The problem is not that temptation exists. Temptation has always existed. The problem is that temptation has become constant. It follows us everywhere. Into our homes, into our pockets, into our bedrooms, into our workplaces, into our moments of silence, into our moments of boredom, into our moments of weakness. And because it is always present, many people stop noticing it. It becomes normal. But normal doesn't always mean healthy. And common doesn't always mean wise. Sometimes the most dangerous habits are the ones everyone else is doing. Which raises an important question. If distraction is now normal, what happens to the people who learn how to focus? If temptation is now everywhere, what happens to the people who learn how to resist it? What happens to the person who takes control of their attention instead of surrendering it? The answer is simple. They gain an advantage. Not because they're smarter, not because they're luckier, but because they're operating differently. While others are being pulled in every direction, they are moving with intention. While others are reacting, they are choosing. While others are drifting, they are steering. And over time, those differences compound. Small decisions become large outcomes. Small habits become powerful identities. Small moments of resistance become extraordinary lives. And that realization changes everything. Because it means your future is not determined by one massive decision. It's being shaped by countless small decisions happening every day, including the ones you're making right now. The age of endless temptation is real, but so is your ability to rise above it. And before we can learn how to defeat temptation, we must first understand something even deeper. Why does temptation have so much power over us in the first place? That is where our journey goes next. Now, before you start thinking that this chapter is about phones, social media, or technology, let me stop you right there. Because this problem is much bigger than that. Technology may be the vehicle, but temptation has existed for as long as human beings have existed. Long before smartphones, long before the internet, long before notifications and algorithms. Human beings have always struggled with the tension between what feels good now and what will be good later. The names change, the tools change, the environment changes, but the battle remains the same. Imagine a farmer hundreds of years ago. The sun has barely risen. There is work to be done. Fields need attention. Animals need care. Responsibilities are waiting. But there is also another voice, a quieter voice, a comfortable voice, the voice that says, rest a little longer, start later, tomorrow will be fine. Does that sound familiar? Of course it does, because that voice still exists. The only difference is that today it has more tools than ever before. Today, temptation doesn't simply whisper. It sends notifications. It sends reminders. It follows you from device to device. It learns what captures your attention. It studies your preferences. It understands your weaknesses. And if you're not careful, it can begin making decisions for you. Not directly, but gradually, subtly, one small choice at a time. That's how most life-changing habits are formed. Not through dramatic moments, through repeated moments. Imagine a small stream of water flowing over a rock. At first, nothing happens. The rock appears unchanged, strong, solid, unaffected. But year after year, the water keeps flowing. Slowly, almost invisibly, it begins shaping the stone. Not through force, through consistency. Temptation works in a similar way. Rarely through force, almost always through repetition. One excuse repeated often enough becomes a mindset. One distraction repeated often enough becomes a habit. One delay repeated often enough becomes a lifestyle. And that's why awareness matters. Because once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. Let me ask you another question. When was the last time you sat down and intentionally decided how you wanted to spend your attention? Not your money, not your weekend, your attention. Most people budget their finances more carefully than they budget their focus. Yet attention may be even more valuable. Money lost can be earned again. Time lost cannot. Attention lost often becomes life lost. Because your attention determines what grows. Think about a garden. Whatever receives water grows. Whatever receives sunlight grows. Whatever receives care grows. The same principle applies to your life. Whatever receives your attention grows. If fear receives your attention, fear grows. If anger receives your attention, anger grows. If distraction receives your attention, distraction grows. If purpose receives your attention, purpose grows. If discipline receives your attention, discipline grows. This is why attention is not just a resource. It is a responsibility. Every day you are voting. Not with a ballot, not in an election. With your attention, you are casting votes for the person you are becoming. Every scroll is a vote. Every habit is a vote. Every decision is a vote. Every action is a vote. The question is, who are you voting for? The version of yourself that wants immediate comfort? Or the version of yourself that wants a meaningful future? Because whether you realize it or not, those two versions are often competing. One wants ease. The other wants growth. One wants convenience. The other wants purpose. One wants immediate reward. The other wants lasting fulfillment. And the fascinating thing is that both voices sound reasonable. That's what makes the battle difficult. If temptation sounded ridiculous, nobody would listen. If temptation announced itself as destruction, nobody would follow. Instead, it often disguises itself as common sense. Take it easy. You've worked hard. You deserve this. One time won't matter. Start tomorrow. And sometimes those statements are true. The challenge is knowing when they are helping you and when they are quietly sabotaging you. Because there is a difference between rest and avoidance. A huge difference. Rest prepares you to continue. Avoidance prevents you from beginning. Rest restores your energy. Avoidance drains your future. Rest has purpose. Avoidance has excuses. Unfortunately, many people confuse the two. They call avoidance self-care. They call procrastination preparation. They call distraction relaxation. And before long, they find themselves stuck. Not because they lack ability, because they have developed habits that keep them standing still. Have you ever watched someone with incredible potential waste years of their life? Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was a family member. Maybe it was someone you admired. Maybe, if we're being honest, maybe it was you. You could see what they were capable of. You could see their intelligence. You could see their gifts. You could see their opportunities. Yet somehow they never seemed to move forward. Why? Often the answer isn't lack of talent. It's lack of focus. Talent without focus is like a powerful car without a driver. Lots of potential, no direction, and direction matters. In fact, direction matters more than speed. A person moving slowly in the right direction eventually arrives somewhere meaningful. A person moving quickly in the wrong direction simply gets lost faster. That's why this chapter isn't really about temptation. Often the answer isn't lack of talent. It's lack of focus. Talent without focus is like a powerful car without a driver. Lots of potential, no direction, and direction matters. In fact, direction matters more than speed. A person moving slowly in the right direction eventually arrives somewhere meaningful. A person moving quickly in the wrong direction simply gets lost faster. That's why this chapter isn't really about temptation. It's about awareness. Because awareness comes before change. You cannot change what you refuse to notice. And perhaps for the first time in a long time, you're beginning to notice. You're beginning to notice how often your attention is pulled away, how often your focus is interrupted, how often your goals are postponed, how often your intentions are replaced by impulses. That awareness is powerful, more powerful than you might think. Because the moment you see the trap, you stop walking into it blindly. The moment you recognize the pattern, you gain the opportunity to break it. The moment you understand the game, you stop being controlled by it. And that realization marks the beginning of freedom. Not complete freedom, not instant freedom, but the beginning of it. The kind of freedom that starts with a single decision. The decision to pay attention to where your attention is going. The decision to stop living on autopilot. The decision to become intentional. And perhaps that's the real challenge of our time. Not surviving, not succeeding, not accumulating more things. Learning how to remain conscious in a world that constantly tries to distract you. Learning how to protect your focus. Learning how to guard your attention. Learning how to choose your future one decision at a time. Because every temptation is ultimately asking the same question. What matters most to you right now? And your answer to that question, repeated day after day, becomes your life. The age of endless temptation is not ending anytime soon. If anything, it may become even more intense. The distractions will multiply. The opportunities for comfort will increase. The invitations to drift will continue. But so will your ability to choose. So will your ability to focus. So will your ability to resist. And the people who master that ability will possess something increasingly rare: control over their own lives. That is a power worth fighting for. And before we can learn how to build that power, we must understand the invisible chains that keep so many people trapped without even realizing it. That's where our journey leads next. Before we leave this chapter, I want you to consider something that most people never stop long enough to think about. What if the greatest loss in your life isn't something you've already lost? What if it's something you've never discovered? Think about that. When most people hear the word loss, they think about things that were once theirs: money, relationships, opportunities, possessions. But there is another kind of loss, a quieter loss, a more tragic loss: the loss of potential, the loss of a future that never gets built, the loss of talents that never get developed, the loss of dreams that never leave the imagination. And the frightening thing about potential is that you rarely notice it disappearing. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly realize you've wasted 10 years. It happens gradually, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one distraction at a time, one excuse at a time, one surrender at a time, until eventually, the life you imagined and the life you're living begin to look very different. Have you ever met someone who constantly talks about what they're going to do? One day they're going to start that business. One day they're going to write that book. One day they're going to get healthy. One day they're going to learn that skill. One day they're going to pursue that dream. One day, one day, one day. But somehow, one day never arrives. Years pass. Circumstances change. Life moves forward. And they're still standing in the same place. Waiting, hoping, planning, talking, but never moving. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most dreams don't die because of one catastrophic event. Most dreams die from neglect. They die from postponement. They die from distraction. They die from thousands of tiny decisions that seem insignificant at the time. And that should make us pause. Because if tiny decisions can destroy a dream, then tiny decisions can also build one. Think about how encouraging that is. You don't need to transform your entire life tonight. You don't need to become a completely different person tomorrow morning. You don't need perfect discipline. You don't need endless motivation. You simply need to start paying attention to the direction your decisions are taking you. Because every action moves you somewhere. Every action, even the small ones, especially the small ones. The challenge is that small decisions don't look important. A single workout doesn't transform a body. A single page doesn't write a book. A single hour doesn't build a business. A single healthy meal doesn't transform your health. And because the results are invisible at first, many people underestimate their importance. But life is built in the invisible. The roots of a tree grow long before anyone sees the branches. The foundation of a building is laid before anyone admires the structure. The character of a person is shaped long before success becomes visible. Everything meaningful begins beneath the surface, which means the choices you're making today may be creating results you won't see for months or years. That can be frustrating, but it can also be freeing because it means progress is happening even when you can't immediately see it. The problem is that temptation always wants immediate proof, immediate pleasure, immediate rewards, immediate results. Purpose asks for patience. Temptation demands now. Purpose invests in later. And that's one of the reasons so many people struggle. Because waiting is uncomfortable. Building is uncomfortable. Growing is uncomfortable. But do you know what else is uncomfortable? Regret. Watching opportunities pass by is uncomfortable. Knowing you could have done more is uncomfortable. Living below your potential is uncomfortable. The difference is that one discomfort leads somewhere meaningful. The other leads nowhere. So the question isn't whether you will experience discomfort. You will. The question is which discomfort you're willing to choose. The discomfort of discipline or the discomfort of regret? The discomfort of effort or the discomfort of stagnation? The discomfort of growth or the discomfort of remaining the same? Because every life eventually answers those questions, not through words, through actions. And perhaps this is where everything begins to change. Not when you become perfect, not when you eliminate every temptation, not when you suddenly become a master of self-control, but when you become aware that every choice matters. When you begin noticing the small moments, the moments nobody sees, the moments that seem insignificant, the moments where character is quietly formed, because that is where your future is being written, not during major events, not during dramatic turning points, but during ordinary moments. A decision to continue when quitting feels easier. A decision to focus when distraction feels more appealing. A decision to act when procrastination feels comfortable. A decision to choose purpose over impulse. Again and again and again. Eventually, those decisions become habits. Those habits become character. That character becomes identity. And that identity becomes destiny, which means your future is not some distant place waiting for you. Your future is being created right now, in this moment, through the choices you make after listening to these words. That realization is both challenging and empowering. Challenging because it places responsibility in your hands. Empowering because it places possibility there as well. And if there is one thing I hope you take away from this chapter, it is this. Your attention is far more valuable than you think. Protect it, guard it, direct it intentionally, because whatever receives your attention will eventually shape your life. The world will continue competing for it. Distractions will continue demanding it. Temptations will continue chasing it. But you still have a choice. You can decide what deserves access to your mind. You can decide what deserves your focus. You can decide what deserves your time. And that choice may be more powerful than you realize. Because the moment you take ownership of your attention, you begin taking ownership of your future. And now that we've begun to understand the world around us, it's time to look inward. Because some of the strongest chains holding people back are not outside of them. They're inside of them. Invisible, familiar, comfortable. So familiar, in fact, that many people don't even realize they're wearing them. Let's talk about those chains. Chapter 2. The Invisible Chains. Have you ever watched an elephant tied to a small wooden stake and wondered why it doesn't simply walk away? It's a strange sight when you think about it. An animal powerful enough to uproot trees. An animal capable of moving enormous weight. Yet sometimes it remains standing in one place, restrained by something that appears far weaker than itself. Why? Because the chain isn't only around its leg. The chain is in its mind. When the elephant was young, it tried to escape. Again and again. It pulled, struggled, fought, but it wasn't strong enough. Eventually it stopped trying. And years later, even after becoming powerful enough to break free, it still behaves as though it's trapped. Now, whether that story is perfectly accurate or not isn't the point. The point is that human beings do something remarkably similar. We often live inside limitations that no longer have power over us, not because they're real, but because we believe them for so long. And those are the invisible chains, the chains that cannot be seen, the chains that don't appear on the outside, the chains that quietly shape decisions, habits, and entire lives. Let me ask you a question. What if the thing holding you back isn't a lack of opportunity? What if it isn't a lack of talent? What if it isn't a lack of intelligence? What if the thing holding you back is a story you've been telling yourself for years? Think about that. Because every person carries stories. Stories about who they are. Stories about what they can do. Stories about what they deserve. Stories about what is possible. Some of those stories help us. Others quietly imprison us. And the dangerous part is that we rarely question them. We simply accept them as truth. For example, I'm just not disciplined. I'm always late. I never finish what I start. I'm not smart enough. I'm not confident enough. I could never do that. Have you ever said something like that to yourself? Most people have. And here's what's fascinating. Many of those statements are not observations. They're identities. And identities are powerful because people tend to act in ways that are consistent with who they believe they are. A person who believes they are unhealthy will often make unhealthy choices. A person who believes they are lazy will often behave lazily. A person who believes they lack self-control will often surrender more quickly to temptation, not because they must, because the mind seeks consistency. The mind likes familiarity, even when familiarity is harmful. That's why change feels uncomfortable, not because change is impossible, because change challenges identity. Imagine someone who has spent years saying, "I'm terrible at public speaking." Now imagine they give one excellent presentation. What happens? Many people immediately dismiss it. They say, "I just got lucky. That was different. That doesn't count." Why? Because accepting the success would require changing the story they tell themselves. And changing identity can feel frightening, even when the new identity is better. The same thing happens with self-control. Many people have become so accustomed to seeing themselves as victims of temptation that they never consider another possibility. The possibility that they can change. The possibility that they can improve. The possibility that they can become stronger than their impulses. Not overnight, but gradually, one choice at a time. Unfortunately, invisible chains don't stop at identity. They also appear in habits, in routines, in automatic behaviors. Have you ever driven somewhere and barely remembered the journey? Your hands were on the wheel, your eyes were open, but your mind was somewhere else. You arrived almost automatically. That's because human beings are creatures of habit. Much of what we do every day happens without conscious thought. We wake up the same way, follow the same routines, think the same thoughts, react in the same patterns, repeat the same behaviors. Day after day, week after week, year after year, habits are incredibly useful. Without them, everyday life would be exhausting. But habits can also become prisons, especially when they're harmful. Because once a habit becomes automatic, we stop questioning it. We stop noticing it. We stop examining it. It simply becomes part of life. And that's where invisible chains become dangerous. The behavior no longer feels like a choice. It feels inevitable. That's why people often say things like, "That's just how I am." But is it really? Or is it simply what you've practiced the most? Because there is a huge difference. One suggests permanence, the other suggests possibility. And possibility changes everything. Let's imagine two people. Both struggle with procrastination. The first person says, "I'm a procrastinator." The second person says, "I have a habit of procrastinating." Those statements sound similar, but they create completely different futures. The first statement turns the problem into an identity. The second turns it into a behavior. Identities feel permanent. Behaviors can be changed. Do you see the difference? One creates a prison. The other creates a pathway. And perhaps that's one of the most important lessons you'll learn on this journey. You are not your habits. You are not your mistakes. You are not your failures. You are not your worst moments. You are not the labels you've collected over the years. Those things may describe parts of your experience, but they do not define your potential. Yet many people spend years carrying labels that were never meant to become permanent. Maybe someone once told them they weren't good enough. Maybe they failed at something important. Maybe they embarrassed themselves. Maybe they experienced rejection. Maybe they made mistakes. And instead of seeing those events as experiences, they turned them into identities. The failure became, "I am a failure." The rejection became, "I am unwanted." The mistake became, "I am incapable." The setback became, "I am weak." And slowly, the invisible chains became stronger. Not because they were true, because they were repeated. Repeated thoughts become beliefs. Repeated beliefs become behaviors. Repeated behaviors become lifestyles. And lifestyles become destinies. That's why the battle against temptation is never just about resisting external distractions. It's also about confronting internal stories. The stories that tell you growth isn't possible. The stories that tell you change isn't realistic. The stories that tell you you'll always be the same. Because as long as those stories remain unquestioned, they quietly control the direction of your life. But here's the good news. Every invisible chain has something in common. It loses power the moment it is seen. And perhaps, as you're listening right now, you're beginning to see some of yours. Maybe for the first time. Maybe you're recognizing a belief you've carried for years. Maybe you're noticing a pattern you've never questioned. Maybe you're realizing that some of the things you've accepted as permanent are actually changeable. If so, that's not a small realization. That's the beginning of freedom. Because before a person can change their life, they must first change the story they're living inside. And that's exactly where our journey continues. Let's go a little deeper. Because some invisible chains don't come from what we believe about ourselves. Some come from what we believe about the world. And those beliefs quietly shape our decisions every day. For example, have you ever met someone who assumes failure before they even begin? Before they apply for the opportunity? Before they learn the skill? Before they make the attempt? They've already decided the outcome. They've already convinced themselves it won't work. So they never fully commit. And because they never fully commit, they never fully discover what was possible. Now, from the outside, it looks like life defeated them. But that's not what happened. The invisible chain defeated them long before life had the chance. Think about how many opportunities are lost this way. How many dreams never leave the imagination. How many goals never become reality. Not because people are incapable, because they become prisoners of assumptions. Assumptions about success. assumptions about failure, assumptions about themselves, assumptions about what is possible. And perhaps the most dangerous assumption of all is this: this is just the way I am. Because the moment a person truly believes that, growth begins to slow down. Curiosity begins to disappear. Possibility begins to shrink. The future begins to look exactly like the past. And that's tragic, because human beings are remarkably adaptable. People learn new skills, develop new habits, overcome addictions, transform their health, change careers, rebuild relationships, create businesses, write books, master disciplines they once thought impossible. History is filled with examples of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, not because they were born different, because they refused to stay the same. And that's an important distinction. The goal isn't to become someone else. The goal is to become the strongest version of who you already are. But that journey requires honesty, real honesty, not the kind of honesty that points fingers at other people, the kind that looks inward, the kind that asks difficult questions. Questions like, what excuses have I been protecting? What stories have I been repeating? What habits have I accepted without challenge? What beliefs have I mistaken for facts? Those questions can feel uncomfortable, but growth often begins where comfort ends. Imagine you're carrying a backpack. You've been carrying it for so long that you've forgotten it's there. Day after day, year after year, the weight feels normal. Then one day someone points it out. Suddenly you realize how heavy it is. Suddenly you understand why you've been moving so slowly. The backpack didn't become heavier. You simply became aware of it. Invisible chains work the same way. Many people don't realize how much they're carrying. Old fears, old labels, old disappointments, old failures, old expectations, old wounds. And because they've carried them for so long, they assume they're part of who they are. But carrying something for a long time doesn't make it yours forever. Think about that. Just because you've carried a belief for years doesn't mean you have to carry it for the rest of your life. Just because you've struggled with a habit doesn't mean you're destined to struggle with it forever. Just because you've been trapped before doesn't mean you must remain trapped. Yet many people live as if the future has already been decided, as if growth has an expiration date, as if transformation belongs to other people. But why? Who told them that? Who convinced them they had reached their limit? Most of the time, nobody. The belief formed slowly, through repeated experiences, repeated disappointments, repeated failures, until eventually they stopped trying. And that's where invisible chains become especially dangerous. Not when they stop your progress, when they stop your attempts. Because as long as you're trying, there is possibility. As long as you're learning, there is possibility. As long as you're moving forward, there is possibility. But the moment you stop believing change is possible, the battle becomes much harder. That's why hope matters. Not blind optimism, not wishful thinking. Hope, the belief that improvement is possible. The belief that tomorrow can be different from today. The belief that growth remains available. Without hope, effort feels pointless. With hope, effort becomes meaningful. And here's something worth remembering. Every person you admire was once inexperienced. Every expert was once a beginner. Every disciplined person was once undisciplined. Every confident person was once uncertain. Every successful person was once struggling. We tend to see people as they are now. We rarely see the journey that brought them there. We see the result. We don't see the repetitions. We see the achievement. We don't see the setbacks. We see the confidence. We don't see the years of doubt. And because we don't see the process, we sometimes assume they possess something we don't. But more often than not, the difference isn't talent. It's persistence, the willingness to continue despite imperfection, the willingness to keep moving despite setbacks, the willingness to challenge old identities, the willingness to break invisible chains. And perhaps that's the invitation hidden within this chapter. not to become perfect overnight, not to reinvent your entire life tomorrow, but to begin questioning the chains you've accepted, to begin examining the stories you've inherited, to begin asking whether the beliefs you've carried are actually true. Because once you start asking those questions, something interesting happens. The chains begin to loosen, the labels begin to weaken, the assumptions begin to crack, and through those cracks, possibility begins to enter. For the first time in a long time, you start seeing yourself differently, not as a finished product, not as a prisoner of your past, not as someone permanently defined by old habits, but as a person still becoming, still learning, still growing, still capable of change. And that realization is powerful because when a person begins to believe they can change, they start behaving differently. When they behave differently, they create new experiences. Those experiences create new evidence. That evidence creates new beliefs. And those beliefs create a new future. That is how invisible chains are broken. Not all at once. One belief at a time. One decision at a time. One act of courage at a time. And before we learn how to break those chains completely, we need to understand something even deeper. Why does the mind cling so tightly to things that hurt us? Why do we keep returning to habits we know are harmful? Why does temptation often feel stronger than logic? The answer lies within the fascinating machinery of the human brain. And that's where our journey leads next. Have you ever wondered why some of the best things in life often take the longest to achieve? Think about it. A strong body takes time. A successful business takes time. A meaningful relationship takes time. Mastering a skill takes time. Building trust takes time. Developing wisdom takes time. Almost everything valuable requires patience. Yet we live in a world that constantly promises the opposite. Fast results, quick fixes, instant success, immediate pleasure, immediate comfort, immediate rewards. It's almost as if the modern world is whispering the same message every day. Why wait? And if we're honest, that message is incredibly attractive. Because waiting is difficult. Nobody stands in line because they enjoy waiting. Nobody gets excited about slow progress. Nobody wakes up hoping for delayed rewards. Human beings naturally prefer immediate gratification. And that's exactly why it deserves our attention. Imagine a child sitting at a table. In front of them is a marshmallow. They're told something interesting. They can eat the marshmallow now, or they can wait. And if they wait long enough, they'll receive a second marshmallow. Simple choice. Easy, right? Not quite. Because the challenge isn't understanding the reward. The challenge is resisting the temptation that is already available. The child can see it, smell it, imagine eating it. The reward is right there. And suddenly waiting becomes much harder than it sounded. Now think about your own life. How often do you face a similar choice? Maybe not with marshmallows, but with something else. You can save money or spend it immediately. You can exercise or stay comfortable. You can work toward a goal or entertain yourself. You can invest in your future or indulge in the present. Different situation, same battle. And what makes the battle difficult is that the future cannot compete with the present on equal terms. The future is invisible. The present is right in front of you. The future whispers. The present shouts. The future promises. The present delivers immediately, which means if you aren't careful, your entire life can become a series of short-term decisions. And short-term decisions often create long-term problems. Let's think about debt. Most people don't wake up one morning buried in financial trouble. It happens gradually. One purchase, then another, then another. Each decision feels small. Each reward feels immediate. But eventually the future arrives. And when it does, the consequences arrive with it. The same thing happens in other areas of life. Health, relationships, career, Personal growth. The future always arrives eventually. And when it arrives, it reveals the true cost of today's choices. That's why temptation is so powerful. It asks you to focus only on what you gain. It rarely talks about what you lose. Temptation says, "You'll enjoy this." It doesn't say, "You'll sacrifice this opportunity." Temptation says, "This will feel good." It doesn't say, "This may slow your progress." Temptation highlights the reward. Purpose reveals the cost. And mature thinking requires seeing both. Not just what a choice gives you, what it takes from you. Imagine standing at a crossroads. One road is smooth, easy, comfortable. The other road is steep, demanding, uncertain. Most people naturally prefer the first road. Who wouldn't? But what if the easy road leads nowhere? What if the difficult road leads somewhere extraordinary? Wouldn't that change the decision? Of course it would. The challenge is that life rarely shows us the destination immediately. We must walk before we see. We must trust before we know. We must invest before we receive. And that's why patience is such a powerful skill. Patience allows you to act without immediate evidence. Patience allows you to continue when results are invisible. Patience allows you to keep building even when nobody notices. Without patience, every worthwhile goal becomes difficult, because worthwhile goals rarely reward you immediately. A tree does not grow overnight. A reputation is not built overnight. A dream does not become reality overnight. And yet many people quit because they expect visible results too quickly. Imagine planting a seed. The next day you dig it up to check if it's growing. Nothing. So you bury it again. The following day you dig it up once more. Still nothing. Eventually you conclude that growth isn't happening. But the problem isn't the seed. The problem is your impatience. Growth was occurring beneath the surface. You simply couldn't see it yet. The same principle applies to personal transformation. Some of the most important changes happen long before they become visible. Discipline develops quietly. Character develops quietly. Self-control develops quietly. Mental strength develops quietly. And because those changes happen beneath the surface, many people underestimate their progress. They assume nothing is happening, so they quit. But what if they had continued? What if they had trusted the process? What if they had remained patient just a little longer? How different might their lives have become? Maybe that's a question worth asking yourself. How many times have you abandoned something simply because the reward wasn't immediate? How many goals have been left unfinished? How many opportunities have been abandoned? How many dreams have been postponed? Not because they were impossible, because they required patience. Now don't misunderstand me. This isn't about becoming miserable. This isn't about eliminating joy from your life. It's not about refusing every pleasure. That's not wisdom. Wisdom isn't learning how to avoid enjoyment. Wisdom is learning how to choose the right enjoyment at the right time. The problem isn't pleasure. The problem is becoming enslaved by it. The problem is allowing immediate rewards to consistently outrank meaningful goals. Because once that happens, temptation begins steering your life. And wherever temptation leads, purpose usually follows at a distance. The good news is that this pattern can be reversed. Every time you delay gratification, you strengthen something inside yourself. Every time you choose long-term rewards over short-term comfort, you build trust with yourself. And that trust is valuable. Because one of the greatest sources of confidence isn't success. It's self-respect. It's knowing that when you make a promise to yourself, you keep it. It's knowing that when temptation appears, you don't automatically surrender. It's knowing that you are becoming someone who can be trusted by the most important person in your life, yourself. And perhaps that's what this chapter is really about. Not temptation, not dopamine, not even discipline. It's about freedom. The freedom that comes from realizing you don't have to obey every impulse. The freedom that comes from recognizing that every urge is temporary. The freedom that comes from choosing your future over your feelings. Because feelings change. Urges change. Temptations change, but the consequences of your choices often remain. And the more you understand that, the more powerful you become. Not powerful over other people, powerful over yourself. And there is no greater victory than that. Purpose speaks a different language. Purpose says, invest now, prepare now, sacrifice now, benefit later. Can you see why there's tension? One voice promises immediate satisfaction. The other promises future fulfillment. And the brain often finds immediate rewards more attractive, at least initially. This is where many people begin to misunderstand themselves. They assume that because temptation feels strong, it must be stronger than they are. That's not true. Feeling a strong urge does not mean you must obey it. Think about that carefully. Feeling an urge and following an urge are not the same thing. You can feel anger without acting on it. You can feel fear without surrendering to it. You can feel temptation without obeying it. But first you have to understand what's happening, because awareness creates distance, and distance creates choice. Imagine you're standing beside a river. The water is flowing rapidly. If you fall into the river, the current carries you wherever it wants. But if you're standing on the bank observing the river, everything changes. Now you're not trapped inside the current. You're watching it, studying it, understanding it. The same principle applies to temptation. Many people become trapped because they immediately identify with every thought and impulse that enters their mind. They think, I want this. I need this. I must do this. But what if you simply observe the urge instead? What if you noticed it? What if you said, interesting, I'm feeling a strong urge right now. Do you see the difference? One response creates control. The other creates surrender. This may sound simple, but it's powerful, because urges are often temporary, much more temporary than they appear. Have you ever noticed how an intense craving eventually fades? An urge arrives. It feels overwhelming. It demands attention. It insists on being satisfied. But then something interesting happens. Time passes, and the intensity decreases. The urge that felt impossible to resist begins losing strength. Chapter 3. Why your brain wants what hurts you. Have you ever done something you knew you would regret? Not because you didn't know better. Not because nobody warned you. Not because the consequences were hidden. You knew. You saw the outcome coming. And yet you did it anyway. Maybe it was procrastination. Maybe it was overeating. Maybe it was staying in a relationship that was clearly unhealthy. Maybe it was wasting another evening when you had important things to do. Maybe it was returning to a habit you promised yourself you had left behind. Whatever it was, the experience probably left you asking the same frustrating question. Why do I keep doing this? It's a question millions of people ask themselves. And for a long time, many people came to the wrong conclusion. They assumed the answer was weakness, lack of discipline, lack of character, lack of willpower. But what if the answer is more complicated than that? What if part of the struggle comes from the way your brain is designed? Now, before we go any further, let's clear something up. Your brain is not your enemy. In fact, your brain is trying to help you. The problem is that sometimes it's trying to solve yesterday's problems in today's world. Imagine for a moment that you're one of your ancestors thousands of years ago. Food is scarce. Danger is everywhere. Survival is uncertain. In that world, the brain develops certain priorities. Find food. Avoid danger. Seek pleasure. Conserve energy. Stay alive. Those priorities help human beings survive. The problem is that the modern world has changed much faster than the human brain has. Today, most people don't need to hunt for food. Yet the brain still loves high-calorie rewards. Today, most people don't need to conserve every ounce of energy. Yet the brain still prefers convenience. Today, stimulation is everywhere. Yet the brain still reacts to novelty as though it has discovered something important. In other words, the brain often treats modern temptations as opportunities, even when they are distractions. And that's where things become interesting, because the brain loves rewards, especially immediate rewards. Let's say you have two options. Option 1. Spend the evening learning a valuable skill that could improve your life 5 years from now. Option 2. Watch entertaining videos that make you feel good immediately. Which option do you think your brain naturally prefers? For most people, the answer is obvious. The immediate reward. Not because they're foolish, not because they're lazy, because the brain is highly responsive to instant gratification. It likes rewards it can experience now. The future feels distant. The present feels real. And temptation knows this. Temptation always speaks the language of now. It says, feel good now, relax now, enjoy now, start later. Like a wave rising and falling. The problem is that most people never stay with the discomfort long enough to discover this. They assume the feeling will continue forever, so they immediately give in. And every time they do, the brain learns something. It learns, when I create this urge, I get rewarded. And because the brain loves efficiency, it begins repeating the pattern again and again and again. Eventually, a habit forms, not because the habit is evil, not because the person is weak, because the brain is learning. The brain is always learning. The question is, what is it learning from you? Is it learning patience or impulsiveness? Is it learning discipline or avoidance? Is it learning focus or distraction? Every repeated action teaches the brain something. Every repeated choice strengthens a pathway. And over time, those pathways become easier to follow. That's why habits feel automatic. You're not just repeating a behavior, you're strengthening a route. Imagine walking through a field of tall grass. The first time is difficult. You have to force your way through. The second time is easier. The third time is easier still. Eventually, a clear path appears. The same thing happens inside the mind. Repeated actions create mental pathways. The more often you use them, the easier they become to follow. Which means every time you resist temptation, you're not merely saying no. You're building a new path, a stronger path, a better path, a path that leads somewhere meaningful. And perhaps that's one of the most encouraging truths you'll hear in this entire audiobook. You are not fighting a hopeless battle. Every act of resistance matters. Every moment of discipline matters. Every intentional choice matters. Even when the results are invisible. Especially when the results are invisible. Because beneath the surface, something is changing. Your brain is learning. Your habits are shifting. Your character is strengthening. And your future is being shaped. One decision at a time. Now that we understand why the brain loves immediate rewards, we can begin exploring something equally important. Why does instant gratification feel so good in the first place? And why are so many people trapped chasing it? That's where our journey goes next. Have you ever wondered why some of the best things in life often take the longest to achieve? Think about it. A strong body takes time. A successful business takes time. A meaningful relationship takes time. Mastering a skill takes time. Building trust takes time. Developing wisdom takes time. Almost everything valuable requires patience. Yet we live in a world that constantly promises the opposite. Fast results, quick fixes, instant success, immediate pleasure, immediate comfort, immediate rewards. It's almost as if the modern world is whispering the same message every day. Why wait? And if we're honest, that message is incredibly attractive. Because waiting is difficult. Nobody stands in line because they enjoy waiting. Nobody gets excited about slow progress. Nobody wakes up hoping for delayed rewards. Human beings naturally prefer immediate gratification. And that's exactly why it deserves our attention. Imagine a child sitting at a table. In front of them is a marshmallow. They're told something interesting. They can eat the marshmallow now, or they can wait. And if they wait long enough, they'll receive a second marshmallow. Simple choice. Easy, right? Not quite. Because the challenge isn't understanding the reward. The challenge is resisting the temptation that is already available. The child can see it, smell it, imagine eating it. The reward is right there. And suddenly waiting becomes much harder than it sounded. Now think about your own life. How often do you face a similar choice? Maybe not with marshmallows, but with something else. You can save money or spend it immediately. You can exercise or stay comfortable. You can work toward a goal or entertain yourself. You can invest in your future or indulge in the present. Different situation, same battle. And what makes the battle difficult is that the future cannot compete with the present on equal terms. The future is invisible. The present is right in front of you. The future whispers. The present shouts. The future promises. The present delivers immediately, which means if you aren't careful, your entire life can become a series of short-term decisions. And short-term decisions often create long-term problems. Let's think about debt. Most people don't wake up one morning buried in financial trouble. It happens gradually. One purchase, then another, then another. Each decision feels small. Each reward feels immediate. But eventually the future arrives. And when it does, the consequences arrive with it. The same thing happens in other areas of life. Health, relationships, career, personal growth. The future always arrives eventually. And when it arrives, it reveals the true cost of today's choices. That's why temptation is so powerful. It asks you to focus only on what you gain. It rarely talks about what you lose. Temptation says, "You'll enjoy this." It doesn't say, "You'll sacrifice this opportunity." Temptation says, "This will feel good." It doesn't say, "This may slow your progress." Temptation highlights the reward. Purpose reveals the cost. And mature thinking requires seeing both. Not just what a choice gives you, what it takes from you. Imagine standing at a crossroads. One road is smooth, easy, comfortable. The other road is steep, demanding, uncertain. Most people naturally prefer the first road. Who wouldn't? But what if the easy road leads nowhere? What if the difficult road leads somewhere extraordinary? Wouldn't that change the decision? Of course it would. The challenge is that life rarely shows us the destination immediately. We must walk before we see. We must trust before we know. We must invest before we receive. And that's why patience is such a powerful skill. Patience allows you to act without immediate evidence. Patience allows you to continue when results are invisible. Patience allows you to keep building even when nobody notices. Without patience, every worthwhile goal becomes difficult. Because worthwhile goals rarely reward you immediately. A tree does not grow overnight. A reputation is not built overnight. A dream does not become reality overnight. And yet many people quit because they expect visible results too quickly. Imagine planting a seed. The next day you dig it up to check if it's growing. Nothing. So you bury it again. The following day you dig it up once more. Still nothing. Eventually you conclude that growth isn't happening. But the problem isn't the seed. The problem is your impatience. Growth was occurring beneath the surface. You simply couldn't see it yet. The same principle applies to personal transformation. Some of the most important changes happen long before they become visible. Discipline develops quietly. Character develops quietly. Self-control develops quietly. Mental strength develops quietly. And because those changes happen beneath the surface, many people underestimate their progress. They assume nothing is happening, so they quit. But what if they had continued? What if they had trusted the process? What if they had remained patient just a little longer? How different might their lives have become? Maybe that's a question worth asking yourself. How many times have you abandoned something simply because the reward wasn't immediate? How many goals have been left unfinished? How many opportunities have been abandoned? How many dreams have been postponed? Not because they were impossible, because they required patience. Now don't misunderstand me. This isn't about becoming miserable. This isn't about eliminating joy from your life. It's not about refusing every pleasure. That's not wisdom. Wisdom isn't learning how to avoid enjoyment. Wisdom is learning how to choose the right enjoyment at the right time. The problem isn't pleasure. The problem is becoming enslaved by it. The problem is allowing immediate rewards to consistently outrank meaningful goals. Because once that happens, temptation begins steering your life. And wherever temptation leads, purpose usually follows at a distance. The good news is that this pattern can be reversed. Every time you delay gratification, you strengthen something inside yourself. Every time you choose long-term rewards over short-term comfort, you build trust with yourself. And that trust is valuable because one of the greatest sources of confidence isn't success. It's self-respect. It's knowing that when you make a promise to yourself, you keep it. It's knowing that when temptation appears, you don't automatically surrender. It's knowing that you are becoming someone who can be trusted by the most important person in your life, yourself. And perhaps that's what this chapter is really about. Not temptation, not dopamine, not even discipline. It's about freedom. The freedom that comes from realizing you don't have to obey every impulse. The freedom that comes from recognizing that every urge is temporary. The freedom that comes from choosing your future over your feelings. Because feelings change, urges change, temptations change, but the consequences of your choices often remain. And the more you understand that, the more powerful you become. Not powerful over other people, powerful over yourself. And there is no greater victory than that. Because the person who can master themselves possesses a strength that no distraction can easily steal. And now we arrive at another important question. If immediate gratification is so attractive, why does comfort itself become such a trap? Why do so many people remain stuck in situations they desperately want to escape? To answer that, we need to talk about one of the most dangerous forces in the human experience: comfort. As we come to the end of part 1, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. Over the course of these chapters, we've explored some powerful truths about human nature, temptation, discipline, awareness, and the choices that quietly shape our lives. But this journey is only beginning, because understanding temptation is one thing. Learning how to consistently overcome it is another. And in the next part of this audiobook, we're going to go even deeper. We'll explore the hidden forces that influence our decisions, why so many people struggle to stay consistent, how discipline is built in the real world, and the practical principles that can help you create lasting change in your life. So before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What was the biggest lesson you learned from part 1? Share it in the comments below. And if you'd like me to release part 2 of how to resist the irresistible, simply comment part 2. Every comment helps us know you're ready for the next stage of this journey. And if this audiobook helped you in any way, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, not just for yourself, but so others searching for wisdom, growth, discipline, and purpose can discover these lessons too. Light grows when it is shared. Thank you for listening. And until next time, remember, every great life is built one decision at a time. Choose wisely. And I'll see you in part 2.